Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest waves. What happens when a struggling rancher, barely keeping his farm alive, stops to help a stranded woman on a dusty country road? He has no idea that this simple gesture will change everything he thought he knew about generosity, wealth, and the power of human connection. The woman he helps carries secrets that will shake his world, but first, she needs to see if his heart is as genuine as it appears. This is the story of how one moment of compassion became a life-changing encounter that neither of them saw coming. The morning sun painted the Texas sky orange, but James Murphy barely noticed as he loaded the last of his cattle into the trailer. Sweat dripped from his weathered face onto the dusty ground. At 42, he looked older, worn down by years of fighting drought, debt, and disappointment. His ranch, once his pride and joy, now felt like a weight around his neck. 20 head, he muttered, counting again. 20 cattle. That's all that remained of the 100 his father had left him 5 years ago. The bank notice in his back pocket crinkled as he moved. 30 days. That's all the time he had left before they took everything. James climbed into his beat-up Ford pickup truck, the engine coughing to life on the third try. The radio crackled with static, playing some country song about better days. He switched it off. Better days felt like a cruel joke right now. The drive to the livestock auction would take 2 hours on back roads he'd traveled since childhood. These same roads had once represented freedom and possibility. Now they felt like a countdown to the end of everything his family had built. As he rounded a bend near Miller's Creek, James saw her. A woman stood beside a silver car, hood up, steam rising like morning mist. She wore a simple blue dress and looked completely out of place on this forgotten stretch of highway. Most people drove the interstate these days, avoiding these old country roads. James slowed down, his conscience battling with his schedule. He needed to get to the auction early to get a good spot. Every dollar mattered now. But his mother had raised him better than to drive past someone in trouble. He pulled over behind the silver car and got out, his boots crunching on the gravel shoulder. Up close, he could see the car was expensive, probably cost more than he made in 2 years. The woman looked to be in her 50s, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back simply. "Having trouble, ma'am?" James asked, removing his worn cowboy hat out of respect. She looked up with obvious relief. "Oh, thank goodness. Yes, I think my car overheated. I'm not really sure what to do." James walked over to examine the engine. Steam billowed from the radiator, and he could see the problem immediately. "Looks like you've got a busted radiator hose. Nothing too serious, but you'll need water and a temporary fix to get anywhere." The woman's face fell. "Is there a service station nearby?" James shook his head. "Not for 30 miles, and that's if Peterson's is still open. He's been talking about retiring." He studied her face, seeing genuine worry there. "Tell you what, I've got some water in my truck and some duct tape. Won't be pretty, but it'll get you to town." "I couldn't ask you to do that," she protested. "You're obviously busy." James glanced back at his cattle trailer. The auction would be starting soon, but he couldn't leave her stranded. "It's no trouble. My cattle aren't going anywhere." For the next 20 minutes, James worked on the car while the woman watched. He patched the hose with duct tape, refilled the radiator with water from his emergency jug, and checked all the connections. His hands got dirty, and his shirt acquired new stains, but he didn't mind. "You're very kind," the woman said as he finished up. "I'm Margaret, by the way." "Margaret Thompson." "James Murphy," he replied, wiping his hands on a rag. "You should be able to make it to town now, but drive easy and keep an eye on the temperature gauge." Margaret reached into her purse, but James held up a hand. "No need for that, ma'am. Just pass it on when you can." She studied his face for a moment, as if memorizing it. "You're sure? I feel like I should do something to thank you." James smiled, the first genuine smile he'd felt in weeks. "Helping someone out is thanks enough. My mother always said kindness comes back around when you need it most." As Margaret drove away, James realized he was running late. He pushed his truck harder than usual, arriving at the auction just as the bidding began. The prices were lower than he'd hoped, but not terrible. His 20 cattle brought enough to buy him another month with the bank, maybe 2 if he was careful. The drive home felt longer than usual. The empty trailer rattled behind him, a hollow sound that matched the feeling in his chest. He tried not to think about what would happen when the next payment came due. Back at the ranch, James sat on his porch as evening settled over the land. The silence felt heavy without the sound of cattle. His border collie, Rex, lay beside him, sensing his mood. In the distance, he could see the lights of his neighbor's place, where prosperity still lived. His phone rang, startling him. The number was unfamiliar. "Hello? Mr. Murphy? This is Margaret Thompson. We met this morning." James sat up straighter. "Yes, ma'am. Your car running all right?" "Oh, yes, thank you. Listen, I hope this isn't strange, but I was wondering if you might have time to show me your ranch. I'm very interested in cattle operations." James frowned. It seemed like an odd request, especially from someone who'd seemed so out of place on a country road. "Well, I suppose so. Though there's not much to see right now. Would tomorrow afternoon work? Say around 2? After hanging up, James wondered what he'd gotten himself into. The last thing he needed was some city woman poking around his failing operation. But she'd seemed genuine, and he supposed there was no harm in it. The next morning brought more bills in the mail and a call from his banker. "Just checking in, James. How did the auction go?" "Got enough for this month," James replied, not mentioning how close he'd cut it. Good, good. Listen, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but the bank president is pushing for a resolution on your loan. I've been buying you time, but there's only so much I can do." After the call, James walked his property with Rex. The land stretched for miles, rolling hills covered in brown grass. It hadn't rained properly in 6 months. The pond was low, and the old windmill creaked in the breeze. His grandfather had built that windmill with his own hands. At exactly 2 o'clock, the silver car pulled into his driveway. Margaret got out, wearing jeans and boots this time, looking more prepared for a ranch visit. She moved differently too, more purposeful, like someone who knew her way around livestock operations. "Thank you for agreeing to this," she said, shaking his hand. "No problem. Where would you like to start?" As they walked the property, Margaret asked detailed questions about his operation. She knew about cattle breeding, feed costs, and land management. Her questions were too specific, too informed for casual curiosity. "You seem to know quite a bit about ranching," James observed as they stopped by the empty cattle pen. Margaret smiled. "I grew up on a ranch in Montana. Haven't been around cattle in years, but you never really forget." They spent 2 hours walking the property. Margaret listened as James talked about his family's history on the land, his struggles with drought and debt, and his love for the work despite everything. He found himself opening up in a way he hadn't with anyone in months. As they returned to the house, Margaret paused by the old windmill. "This is beautiful craftsmanship. How old is it?" "My grandfather built it in 1952. Still pumps water when the wind's right." Margaret ran her hand along the weathered wood. "He sounds like he was a good man. The best. He taught me that land isn't just something you own, it's something you're responsible for. Something you pass on better than you found it." James's voice caught slightly. "I'm afraid I'm failing at that." Margaret turned to face him fully. "Why do you say that?" The words came pouring out then. The debt, the drought, the impossible choice between selling the cattle and losing the ranch. How he'd worked 2 jobs in town but couldn't keep up with the payments. How every morning he woke up hoping for rain and every evening he went to bed disappointed. Margaret listened without judgment, asking occasional questions but mostly just letting him talk. When he finished, they stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink lower in the sky. "I should let you get back to your evening," Margaret said finally. As she prepared to leave, she turned back one more time. James, I want you to know that what you did yesterday, stopping to help a stranger when you had your own troubles to worry about, that says something important about who you are. After she left, James sat on his porch again, feeling oddly lighter despite having shared his burdens. There had been something about Margaret, something that made him feel heard and understood in a way he hadn't experienced in a long time. He had no idea that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't imagine. 3 days passed without word from Margaret, and James tried to put their conversation out of his mind. He had bigger problems to focus on. The bank had called twice more, and his neighbor, Bill Richardson, had stopped by with an offer that made his stomach turn. $500,000 for the whole spread, Bill had said, leaning against his shiny new truck. I know it's not what it's worth in good times, but these ain't good times, James. Bank's gonna take it anyway if you don't do something. James had thanked him politely and said he'd think about it, but they both knew $500,000 wouldn't even cover his debts. It would leave him with nothing but the clothes on his back and nowhere to go. On Thursday morning, as James repaired fence line that had been damaged in the last storm, he heard a car coming up the drive. He expected to see Margaret's silver sedan, but instead, a black SUV pulled up to the house. 2 men in expensive suits got out, looking completely out of place against the rural backdrop. James walked over, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The older man, probably in his 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes, extended a hand. "Mr. Murphy? I'm Robert Thompson. I believe you met my sister, Margaret, a few days ago." James shook his hand, confused. "Your sister?" "Yes. She told me about your kindness when her car broke down. May we have a word?" They sat on James's porch, the 2 men looking oddly formal in their business attire. Robert Thompson pulled out a folder and set it on the small table between them. "Mr. Murphy, my sister was quite impressed with your ranch operation. She has a proposal that might interest you." James felt a knot forming in his stomach. "What kind of proposal?" "Before we get to that, let me ask you something. When you helped Margaret on the road, did you know who she was?" "Should I have?" James asked, genuinely puzzled. Robert smiled, the first genuine expression James had seen from him. "No, I suppose not. You don't follow business news much, do you?" "Not really. Don't have much time for it." Robert opened the folder and pulled out a newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Thompson Agricultural Enterprises reports record profits." Below it was a photo of Margaret at what looked like a corporate event, wearing an elegant suit instead of the simple dress James remembered. "My sister Margaret is the CEO of Thompson Agricultural Enterprises. We're one of the largest agricultural companies in the Southwest. We own ranches, processing plants, and distribution networks across 5 states. James stared at the photo, his mind reeling. "She never said anything about that." "No, she wouldn't. Margaret has a habit of traveling incognito, you might say. She likes to see how regular folks live, how real ranching operations work. It helps her stay connected to the business." The younger man, who'd been silent until now, leaned forward. "What my uncle is trying to say is that Margaret often poses as just a regular person to observe agricultural operations without people knowing who she is." James felt a surge of anger mixed with embarrassment. "So she was studying me like some kind of experiment?" Robert held up a hand. "Not exactly. Her car really did break down, and your help really was appreciated. But, yes, once she saw your operation, she was interested from a business perspective." James stood up abruptly, pacing to the edge of the porch. "I opened up to her. Told her things about my family, my troubles. She let me pour my heart out while she was probably taking mental notes." "James," Robert said gently, "may I call you James? My sister didn't tell you who she was because she wanted to see the real you. And what she saw impressed her more than any business presentation ever could." James turned back to face them. "What's that supposed to mean?" Robert pulled out another document from his folder. "It means she wants to make you an offer. Not to buy your ranch, but to save it. For the next hour, Robert outlined a proposal that seemed too good to be true. Thompson Agricultural Enterprises wanted to enter into a partnership with James's ranch. They would pay off his debts, provide operating capital for restocking and improvements, and give him a guaranteed income as the operation manager. You'd maintain ownership of the land, Robert explained. We'd have a management contract that ensures profitability. You'd run the day-to-day operations, make the decisions about cattle and land management, but you'd have the resources of our company behind you. James read through the contract carefully, looking for the catch he was sure must be there. What do you get out of it? This seems like a lot of money for not much return. The younger man, who'd introduced himself as David Thompson, Margaret's nephew, answered. We get a local presence in this region, and access to your expertise in sustainable ranching practices. But, honestly, this is as much about Margaret's belief in doing the right thing as it is about business. I don't understand. Robert leaned back in his chair. James, my sister built her company from nothing. She started with one small ranch in Montana after our parents died. She knows what it's like to struggle, to face losing everything. Along the way, she promised herself that if she ever had the means, she'd help people who reminded her of herself. And I remind her of herself? Your dedication to the land, your willingness to work multiple jobs to try to save the ranch, your refusal to give up even when things look hopeless. Yes, you remind her very much of the young woman she used to be. James walked to the edge of the porch again, looking out over his land. The hills stretched endlessly under the afternoon sun, brown and tired but still beautiful. His grandfather's windmill turned slowly in the breeze. There's one thing I need to know, James said finally. When she was here, when I told her about my troubles, was that real? Or was she just gathering information? Robert exchanged a look with his nephew. That's a question only Margaret can answer. But, I will say this, in 40 years of knowing my sister, I've never seen her more affected by a story than she was by yours. That evening, after the men had left with promises to call the next day, James sat on his porch trying to process everything. The contract sat on the table beside him, offering a solution to all his problems. But, something about the whole situation troubled him. His phone rang just as the sun was setting. Margaret's voice was soft on the other end. James, I heard that Robert and David came to see you today. They did. James kept his voice neutral. I'm sorry. I know you must feel deceived. James was quiet for a long moment. I do feel deceived. But, I'm trying to understand why you didn't tell me who you were. Margaret sighed. Because the moment people know who I am, everything changes. They see dollar signs instead of a person. They tell me what they think I want to hear instead of the truth. When my car broke down and you stopped to help, you didn't see the CEO of a major corporation. You saw a person in trouble. And that mattered to you? More than you know. James, I've been successful in business, but success can be isolating. Most of the kindness I receive is calculated, designed to get something from me. Your kindness was pure. It reminded me why I got into this business in the first place. James found himself softening despite his anger. So this offer, is it real? Or is it some kind of charity? It's real business, James. We've researched your operation, your land, your reputation in the community. You're exactly the kind of partner we want. But, I won't lie to you, the terms are generous because I believe in second chances. Why me? You could help hundreds of struggling ranchers. Margaret's voice grew quiet. Because when you had your own troubles weighing on your mind, you still stopped to help a stranger. Because when you talked about your grandfather's windmill and passing the land on better than you found it, I heard something in your voice that I haven't heard in years. What's that? Love for the work itself, not just the profit it might bring. That's rare, James. Rarer than you know. After they hung up, James walked out to his grandfather's windmill. The old structure stood silently in the still evening air, its blades motionless. He ran his hand along the weathered wood, thinking about all the generations who had worked this land before him. The next morning brought rain, the first real rain in months. James stood on his porch watching it fall, feeling like it might be a sign. By noon, the brown grass already looked greener, and the pond was starting to rise. He called Robert Thompson's office and asked for a meeting. When they arrived that afternoon, James had made his decision. "I'll accept your offer," he said, "but with conditions." Robert raised an eyebrow. "What kind of conditions?" "I want to meet with Margaret face to face before I sign anything. I want to look her in the eye and know that this is about more than business guilt." "That can be arranged. And I want to understand exactly what my role would be. I won't be a figurehead manager while someone else makes the real decisions." David nodded. "The whole point is to keep you in charge of operations. We're providing resources, not taking over." "One more thing," James said. "I want to know that if this partnership doesn't work out, if for some reason things go bad, the land stays with me. I won't risk losing what my family built." Robert smiled. "I think we can work with that." As they left to arrange the meeting with Margaret, James felt a cautious optimism he hadn't experienced in years. The rain continued to fall, gentle and steady, soaking into the thirsty earth. For the first time in months, the future looked like something other than an ending. But he still had questions that only Margaret could answer. The meeting with Margaret was scheduled for the following Saturday at a small cafe in town, neutral ground that felt less formal than either of their offices. James arrived early, wearing his best shirt and feeling nervous in a way he hadn't since his first date with his ex-wife years ago. Margaret walked in exactly on time, and James was struck again by how different she looked from the corporate photo he'd seen. Today she wore simple jeans and a cotton blouse, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked like the woman he'd helped on the roadside, not the CEO of $1 million company. "Thank you for agreeing to this," she said, settling into the booth across from him. "I know you must have questions." James studied her face, looking for signs of deception or corporate calculation. Instead, he saw something that looked like nervousness. "I do have questions. Starting with why you really want to help me." Margaret ordered coffee and was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "James, when I built my company, I had mentors who believed in me when I had nothing to offer but determination and a dream. Without them, I never would have succeeded. But I'm not trying to build a company. I'm just trying to save what I already have." "That's exactly why I want to help," Margaret said earnestly. "You're not looking for a handout or a get-rich-quick scheme. You're trying to honor your family's legacy and preserve something valuable. That matters to me." The waitress brought their coffee, and Margaret wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "Can I tell you something about myself?" James nodded. "When I was 25, I almost lost my ranch in Montana. I was drowning in debt, working 3 jobs, and still couldn't make the payments. One day, an older rancher named Frank Muller stopped by my place. He'd heard about my troubles and offered to help." "What did he do?" "He co-signed a loan that got me through the crisis. But, more than that, he taught me about sustainable ranching practices, introduced me to buyers, and became a mentor. When I asked him why he'd helped a stranger, he said something I've never forgotten." Margaret paused, sipping her coffee. "He said, 'Margaret, success isn't just about what you accumulate. It's about what you pass on.' He told me that someday, when I had the means, I should find someone else who reminded me of myself and pay it forward." James felt a chill of recognition. "That sounds like something my grandfather would have said." "I think good people often think alike," Margaret smiled. "Frank Muller died 10 years ago, but his ranch is still in his family, thriving under his son's management. Every time I drive past it, I'm reminded that the best investments aren't always about financial returns." "So this is about paying it forward?" "Partly. But it's also about recognizing something valuable when I see it. James, in the few hours I spent at your ranch, I saw sustainable practices that many corporations spend millions trying to implement. Your land management, your approach to cattle care, your understanding of the ecosystem, it's exactly what the industry needs more of." James shook his head. "I'm just doing what my father and grandfather taught me. That's my point. That knowledge, that approach, it's becoming rare. Too many operations focus only on maximum yield without considering long-term sustainability. You're doing something different, something valuable. They talked for 2 hours, and James found himself believing her sincerity. Margaret shared stories about her early struggles, her mistakes, and the mentors who had shaped her approach to business. In return, James told her more about his family's history on the land, his vision for the ranch, and his fears about losing everything. "There's something else I want you to know," Margaret said as they prepared to leave. "This partnership, if you agree to it, won't be charity. We'll expect results. We'll expect you to expand the operation, implement new sustainable practices, and serve as a model for other ranches in our network." "You have other ranches?" "We're planning to develop a network of sustainable ranching operations. Ranchers who share our values and want to prove that you can be profitable while still caring for the land. You'd be our first partner, but not our last." James felt a surge of excitement mixed with nervousness. "That's a lot of responsibility." "It is. But, based on what I've seen, you're ready for it." The following Monday, James signed the partnership agreement in Robert Thompson's office. As he wrote his name on the final page, he thought about his grandfather and the windmill he'd built with his own hands. This felt like building something too, just in a different way. Within a month, the transformation began. Thompson Agricultural provided funds to restock the ranch with high-quality cattle, repair aging infrastructure, and implement new water conservation systems. But, more importantly, they brought in agricultural specialists who worked with James to develop innovative approaches to sustainable ranching. Dr. Sarah Chen, a specialist in regenerative agriculture, became a regular visitor to the ranch. She worked with James to implement rotational grazing patterns that improved soil health and increased grass production. "What you've been doing instinctively," she told him, "we're going to refine and systematize so other ranchers can learn from it." The changes weren't just practical, they were financial too. Within 6 months, the ranch was operating in the black for the first time in years. The combination of better cattle, improved land management, and access to Thompson Agricultural's distribution network created profitability James had never experienced. But the most unexpected change was personal. Margaret began visiting the ranch regularly, sometimes for business but often just to check in. She and James developed a friendship built on mutual respect and shared values. She would arrive with her sleeves rolled up, ready to help with whatever needed doing, whether it was fixing fence or moving cattle. "You know," James said to her one afternoon as they watched cattle graze in a field that was greener than it had been in years, "when I stopped to help you that day, I was sure my luck had run out." Margaret smiled. "Maybe your luck was just getting started. I still can't believe this is real sometimes. A year ago, I was about to lose everything. Now I'm running a model ranch and training other ranchers. You earned this, James. The partnership just gave you the resources to do what you were already capable of." As the first year of the partnership concluded, James received an invitation that surprised him. Thompson Agricultural was hosting its annual conference, and they wanted him to be the keynote speaker. 200 ranchers from across the Southwest would gather to learn about sustainable ranching practices. Standing at the podium, looking out at the faces in the audience, James thought about the journey that had brought him there. A year ago, he had been desperate and alone, facing the loss of everything his family had built. Now he was sharing his knowledge with others who faced similar challenges. "A year ago," he began, "I thought kindness was a luxury I couldn't afford. I was wrong. Kindness isn't something you do when you have extra time or money. It's something you do because it defines who you are. And, sometimes, if you're very lucky, that kindness comes back to you in ways you never could have imagined." In the audience, Margaret listened with tears in her eyes, thinking about Frank Muller and the lesson he'd taught her about passing things on. After the conference, James and Margaret walked through the hotel garden, reflecting on how far they'd both come. "I have something to ask you," Margaret said. "Thompson Agricultural is expanding our sustainable ranching program. We want to establish 10 new partnerships in the next 2 years. Would you be interested in heading up that program?" James stopped walking and turned to face her. "You want me to help other ranchers the way you helped me?" I want you to be the Frank Mueller for someone else who reminds you of yourself. James thought about the ranchers he'd met at the conference, many of them struggling with the same challenges he'd faced. He thought about his grandfather's windmill and the principle of passing things on better than you found them. Yes, he said simply. I'd like that very much. 6 months later, James found himself in a situation that felt remarkably familiar. He was driving to visit a struggling ranch in New Mexico when he saw a broken-down truck by the side of the road. A young man in his 20s stood beside it, looking frustrated and defeated. James pulled over without hesitation. Having trouble, he asked, getting out of his truck. The young man looked up with surprise and relief. Yes, sir. Radiator hose bust, and I'm supposed to be at the cattle auction in an hour. James smiled, remembering another roadside encounter that had changed his life. Let's see what we can do about that. As he worked on the truck, James learned that the young man, Carlos, was facing the same challenges he had faced 2 years earlier. Drought, debt, and the threat of losing the family ranch. You know, James said as he finished the repair, I might be able to help you with more than just your truck. 3 years after that first roadside encounter, James's program had helped establish 15 sustainable ranch partnerships. Each ranch served as both a profitable operation and a training center for other ranchers. The program had created a network of sustainable agriculture that was changing the industry. Margaret often joked that her best business decision had been having car trouble on a remote Texas road. But James knew it was more than that. It was about recognizing that true success comes not from what you accumulate, but from what you pass on. Every morning when he walked out to check on his cattle, James could see his grandfather's windmill in the distance, still turning in the wind, still pumping water for the land. It reminded him that some things endure, and that the best way to honor the past is to build something valuable for the future. The poor rancher who had shown simple kindness to a stranger had discovered that kindness, like water from an old windmill, never really stops flowing. It just finds new channels, new purposes, new ways to sustain life.